welcome everyone. My name is Ben Townsend with Tracker Products. I have completely lost track of what webinar number this is. I should check with Max before I started. This is we're probably getting pretty close to 30 of these webinars that I've done. And so I welcome you guys here today. I hope you enjoy the topic that we're going to present to you. A couple of notes before we get the ball rolling, as I always like to point out, the evidence management group within Facebook, and right there at the very top is a link to that. If you are not a member of the community group in Facebook, it's unbelievable. I would highly recommend that you go there and get membership into that group. There's no cost to membership. We just add you in. But the importance of being in there is if you've got questions, comments, thoughts, things you want to bounce off people, I am constantly amazed at the chatter that's taking place in the community group. It is generally what I would suggest. If you've got a question, it's the first place to go, because you will get responses from lots of people all over the country. I'm seeing stuff being posted in there all the time. So it is a really good place to go. Also, the Evidence Management Institute, evidencemanagement.com/free-training. They also do a little more frequently than I do. They do, I believe it's a bi-weekly or maybe every 3 weeks, they will do their own webinar that is really awesome. They cover a different range of topics than what we typically cover, but it's another place that you can go get signed up to check out some other webinar related stuff. I should also ask Max, I want to make sure everybody's seeing my screen right now. I'm talking about stuff on my screen. So if you're not seeing that, somebody yell in the chat window that you're not seeing my screen, but I do believe I'm pushing that out. Let me see, there's other couple links down here at the bottom. Our total evidence management solution, if you want to check out a little bit more about Tracker Products and what we do and how we go about doing it. A really good place to start is trackerproducts.com/TIMS. We do have a free online health check also. If you want to know a little bit more about your evidence room and whether or not you are as good as what you think you are, we have a free health check that you can take, and it'll definitely give you a report to give you an initial assessment of how well your operation is running. So definitely check that out. All right, well, let me make a quick introduction. Beth, are you on here right now?
Hello there.
All right, hello Beth, and I want to introduce everybody to Beth. Beth was a panelist member of mine way back in the early, when we first did these webinars. I don't know, maybe the 4th or 5th webinar that we did, Beth was a guest panelist, and I've asked her to come back today because the topic that we're discussing specifically, she has definite experience on it. She's going to share a little bit of her war stories and some of the good things and the bad things that she did when she was moving her evidence room, and we're going to dig into that. So hello, Beth, glad you could be here with us today.
Hello there, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I appreciate your willingness to expose yourself a little bit. I'm going to try not to expose you too much, but some of what you're going to talk about today are we'll title it things you've learned. And maybe you didn't do things the best way possible, but I appreciate you being willing to come on and share some of your input, because you're different than I am. You worked in an evidence room. So, I mean, literally you have experience of operating in an evidence room.
Absolutely.
So, all right, appreciate you being here. So the title of our the webinar today is how to, and it was titled Move Your Evidence Room, and I've relabeled it How to Properly Move Your Evidence Room. Because one of the things that I would suggest, and I'm painting with a broad brush here, but I believe that most evidence people that I know, they want to do a good job. They work really hard to do a good job, and they would not readily admit out loud that they cut corners. In fact, most evidence administrators that I know, they are definitely a specific type of personality, and they sort of contract a little bit at the idea of cutting corners. But there is something about this process of moving evidence that all of a sudden will make people want to think I can cut corners a little bit. I don't know what it is about this process, and then I'm going to break it up a little bit here today and talk a little bit about why I think that is. But it's the one area of the evidence room where lots of times, in fact, maybe even more often than not, I will see corners being cut because it takes too much time, it's difficult, and all the things that go into that. So I am definitely going to lay out a case today of how I think you should properly move an evidence room and doing it the right way. So the first thing I want to start out with is let's just make sure we're on the same page about what is moving. Because if I asked everybody here, what is moving to you, we may come up with different definitions. So I've actually got two definitions of what I think moving is. The first is a very broad definition, moving your evidence from one facility to another, or maybe even a new room within your existing facility. So when I say moving, I think that's what probably most people think of. But I would argue at a much more finite level, moving evidence from one storage location to another, that is also moving evidence. So if I have shelf on shelf 1 and I'm moving it to shelf 2, I deem that to be moving evidence. And so both of these definitions, broadly and finite, I'm going to make the same argument for both of them. In fact, I'm going to make the same argument that if you are complying with things at a finite level where generally it's easier to accomplish, you should be beholden to the same level at a broad level. And that's the problem we usually run into, is people are great with the finite example of it, but when we get into the broad definition of it, all of a sudden that's where we want to have a different definition to it. But those are my definitions of moving evidence. Now, the second thing we want to talk about, in fact, I would argue, probably the root job of somebody in an evidence room is chain of custody. It is the buzzword that most describes what we do in our world, and it's probably the buzzword of what is in your world, which is chain of custody. Now, I asked Sean from the Evidence Management Institute to weigh in on this, and Sean told me. So if you guys don't know who Sean Henderson is with the Evidence Management Institute, he's the director of the Evidence Management Institute. So he does a lot of training all across the country, and the evidencemanagement.com website has policies and procedures, and they train people on doing things the right way. So when it comes to this, I asked him, what is the right definition? So the Evidence Management Institute states that movement of evidence should include a chain of custody entry, even if that movement is from one storage location to another within your evidence room, i.e. move evidence from shelf 1 to shelf 2. Okay? Using this guidance, you absolutely should have chain of custody records for all items that are moved from one room or facility to another, or a shelf 1 to shelf 2. Okay? There's not a lot of wiggle room within that definition. It's pretty straightforward that if you're moving evidence, if you go back a screen and you are in agreement with the broad and the finite definitions I use for moving evidence, and you agree with the statement on chain of custody, those are two really foundational principles right there. However, the detractors will argue it is too much work to scan every item or to do a transaction to record chain of custody movement. If I'm moving 10,000 items, the amount of work that is required to do that is staggering. It's just too much. Now, I'm going to say the next part, and I want to say this kindly, but I also want to be very bold in my statement, because I think this statement needs to be bold. I don't think it's too harsh to suggest that the primary and main job of an evidence custodian is to ensure the valid chain of custody for each piece of evidence. If you do not record this movement, you are simply failing at your primary role and potentially subjecting your agency to failed audits. Yes, I know that is a very, very forward statement, and I hope I didn't offend anybody by making the statement, but that doesn't mean that's not a true statement. In fact, I would say if you printed that out right there, if you took a screenshot of that and printed it out, and you asked the chief or the sheriff or your boss or whoever to weigh in on your primary role as an evidence custodian, would they agree with that statement? And I think the answer is largely they would agree with that. Now, I understand many times we don't want them to agree with that. We don't want things to be more difficult, but that is generally what I see the detractors will state, is it's just too much work to do all of that. So I do say it takes more time. Yes, it almost always takes more time and effort to do things the right way. In fact, you might be able to say it always takes more time in the short run, for sure. Now, If you don't do it this way, you may have more time in the long run when you undergo an audit or when somebody finds out that you've taken shortcuts and all of a sudden you've exposed yourself. You're just going to pick the time up on the back end, and then you may be unemployed at that point in time. So here are some of the things that I will see people do to cope with the amount of time that it takes. All right. And so in a minute, we're going to dig into what I think is the right way to do it. I'm going to show you things that I see being done that are definitely the wrong way. So the first one is a blind transaction. What do I mean by that? Some will record chain of custody for each item, but will use built-in automation like our software to do a blind transaction. This is a transaction where chain of custody is recorded, but a scan of the item is not completed. Most evidence management applications will allow you to go into the software and do searches, and you may be able to bring up a list of 5,000 items. And you might also be able to run a single transaction against 5,000 items, and you may be able to say, I'm moving this evidence from this room to the other room in one simple transaction where you did not scan every individual item. Is that quicker? How much time would it take to select 5,000 items and do one big batch transaction where you don't scan it? You may be able to do it within seconds or a minute, versus how long would it take you to scan 5,000 items and move them, what I would say is properly. Here's the reason that is a really, really bad idea. And I know I put really in there twice. In this case, if an item ever shows up missing, there will be a chain of custody record indicating it was moved, and therefore it will be assumed that that item did make the transition when it might not have. And so now imagine that you do this blind transaction, someday down the road something shows up missing, and if they look at the chain of custody, it's going to say, oh, well, they moved it on this date and time. And how are you going to feel when you have to go back and say, well, yes, it did, but all I did was go in and select 5,000 items in one fell swoop and move them all. So everything got moved. And they're going to be like, what did you do? And immediately, in fact, the minute you have to explain that you did a blind transaction to somebody, you are immediately going to know that doesn't feel right. And now all of a sudden, what else got scanned? So that's a bad deal. The next one we see is just what I call a straight move. You don't record the chain of custody. You just pick a storage location up and move the whole thing to the new building. And you might argue, well, maybe you didn't even touch the evidence. Maybe you literally picked up the shelf with all your might and you moved it from one place to the other and evidence was not even touched. Okay. And so what some people will argue is, I'm just doing a straight move of all this stuff. I don't need to scan and redo everything because the location structure is not changing. I understand the building is changing, but the location structure is not changing. In fact, it is possible, moving from one evidence room to the other, that your storage locations don't change. You may literally just pick the shelves up, move them into the new building, and nothing changed about it. Okay. I would argue in that scenario, while that was easier, the operation failed because chain of custody was not recorded. All right, so what about mobile shelving? All right, so in fact, this is what Beth is going to talk about in just a moment. She was actually not moving her evidence room. She had sort of a third option where I'm redoing my entire evidence room, and I'm going to have her talk about this in just a moment. So in her scenario, she moved everything out of the room into a mobile storage unit, and then at some point later, she moved everything back into the evidence room. All right, and so you might argue in that scenario, the locations did not change. In fact, the room didn't even change. But as Beth is going to point out in a moment, you still have to comply with those other two things. Chain of custody is recorded for any movement that is taking place. So I would say even in that scenario, you still need to follow the protocol of moving the stuff into a new location, moving it back. So at a really simple level, let me show you what I think this looks like, especially if you're using evidence management software, okay? I'm showing you what is a unbelievably simplistic version of an evidence room. There is no way your evidence rooms are this basic. But basically on my screen here, I've got 3 storage locations, shelf 1, 2, and 3 in what I call new locations, and then I have shelf 1, 2, and 3 in what I call old locations. So if you're using evidence management software, my guess is every one of them is going to allow some sort of a setup like this. I would highly suggest that you take all of your old stuff, all of your old locations, and move it into a structure called old locations, if you can possibly do that. Okay, I want to segment all the old stuff from all the new stuff. And then I would create a new storage location called new room, new locations. And then I would build out an entirely new structure underneath of that. So what does that mean? That does mean you're rebuilding all of your storage locations. But I believe that when you move evidence, even if the structure is the exact same thing it was in the old evidence room, you should build out a new location structure with all new locations. In fact, if you've got to, you may have to re-tag them. You may have to put new barcode labels on them because they are new storage locations. They're in a new building. And what that would force you to do is to move that evidence, you have to scan every barcode on every item that is moving. But there's a really, really large benefit to doing that. And it's the third thing on the list there. A full inventory is completed. So for example, let's say I have 5,000 items in the old room location spread out amongst however many storage locations you have. If you move 4,942 items, when you're done, your old storage locations are going to indicate there are still 58. I think that's my number. 58 items are still left in the old location. Why? Now, in a minute, Beth is going to talk about that because Beth, one of the things she did was she does inventories every year. Beth, you did them every year. Is that correct? Like all of your evidence every year?
Yes, I split it up monthly, but yes, each year we did a full, like a full inventory, and then drugs, guns, and money we did a few times each year.
Okay, well, we're going to come back and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but nonetheless, the point that I'm making, by moving all of your evidence from the old to the new, not only are you getting a chain of custody entry, but you are doing a full-blown inventory at the same time. And for somebody out there that you may be like Beth, where I'm doing inventories all the time, I know my evidence is spot on, I would still say you need to move this evidence in batches, but scanning every barcode so that if something is wrong, you are not recording chain of custody in an incorrect way. And that's the shortcut that most people want to take is I don't want to scan every barcode for every item. That is painful. It takes time. And I'm simply saying recording bad chain of custody is just bad. Okay, so the primary benefits of doing it that way is chain of custody is recorded. You are complying with evidence best practices and standards. And then, yes, you have a full inventory when it is all said and done with. Anything that's left in the old locations needs to be dealt with. Maybe it was just an accident that you didn't scan it. Maybe it did get moved. But what you got to avoid is that you're moving evidence that's not actually being moved. That's the bad deal. Okay, so here are some other bad ideas I want to talk about before we jump in and talk about Beth's move is hiring movers with unsupervised access. All right, most people are probably not having to deal with that. If you're moving an evidence room, you're probably cringing at the fact that you've got to do all the work yourself on the weekends and you don't have any help. So the idea of hired movers with unsupervised access is not something you're dealing with, but you got to make it just like anybody. I mean, you wouldn't just invite anybody to your evidence room on a normal day. You certainly would not bring in unsupervised people. You would not necessarily just go dump stuff in a Connex box outside your building. That's a bad idea, okay? You got to ask questions about that Connex box. Is it secure? Is it as secure as if it was in my, in my evidence room? And that answer might be no, but you absolutely have to go through the protocol to find out, is that thing secure? Or am I just looking for the most convenient thing and it doesn't matter what's going on? Because I promise you, if somebody were to find out that you're dumping evidence into an unsecure, even if you put a lock on it, again, they don't have to be right about somebody getting into it. All they've got to do is create a little bit of doubt. I say that all the time. In the world of evidence, we're not trying to prove somebody wrong. We're trying to prove doubt, which I think I'm just largely describing the defense process all the time. They don't need to be right. They just need to have doubt. Okay. We don't want those blind moves, bad, bad, bad stuff. We don't want straight moves. All right. We do not want to fail to record chain of custody. If you're going to bring doubt into your system, it's moving stuff around and not recording chain of custody. And then the last bad idea is you get fired because you took shortcuts. And we just don't want that. It's just not worth all of that and creating all the problems that go along with it. So considerations, okay? Things that you need to just to think about as you're moving. And I really want to dig into this with Beth because I think it would be appropriate to get into some of her stuff. What are you going to use for temporary storage if you're moving? You know, are you going to use Connex boxes? Are you going to use, you know, whatever it may be sitting out in the back of your building? Proper protection and security. Goodness gracious, you've got to make sure this stuff is as locked down and secured and as can possibly be. Make sure video cameras are around. You want video cameras everywhere. So there is a difference in putting a Connex box in the back of your building where it's, you know, inside a gated area. There's patrol cars, there's people coming in and out, there's security everywhere, there's a guard at the door. You know, that is different than I just parked it at the school down the road and like nobody's watching it. Yeah, it's got a lock on it. That obviously very big difference there. You want to make sure access to that thing is also controlled. Definitely video recording. I would submit to you guys that, you know, we live in a world now where video and recording is easier and cheaper than it's ever been. If you're moving an evidence room and you don't have cameras in there, get cameras. Actually, somebody in our company brought up the idea of, you know, taser cameras are now everywhere. If you've got somebody dealing with evidence, make them wear a body cam and turn it on and record everything they're doing. You know, why would you not? That's an easy thing to employ when you're going through the process of moving. So let's do this. I've been doing all the talking now, and I want to bring Beth in so that Beth can share a little bit of her story. So Beth, why don't you just walk us through, you know, some of the basics, and I'll ask some questions and lead you down the road a little bit. Tell me about your evidence room and what you went through to move.
So you can see our evidence room was a little bit crazy. The way that, you know, we had just so much evidence and not enough space. And so we were able to get funding for the mobile shelving. And so in order to get that in there, we had to take absolutely everything out of the property room for them to be able to install that. And so what we did is just box by box, we with a dolly took everything out, and then we had a pod that we kept in like a gated area at our PD. And so we had to pull everything out into the pod. And then I think we had that for like a month or two while they installed the mobile shelving, and then we brought everything back. And so it was quite a,
let me hop in a couple of questions here of you, Beth. Before you did this move, how much oversight did you have? Did somebody tell you what to do, or did you come up with the process of the pod in the back of the building?
No, I mean, my supervisor at the time was amazing. I absolutely loved him. He was a great mentor. So, I mean, he helped as much as he could, but for the most part, everything, like trying to get the funding for it, pretty much all of that, it was all on me. You know, he would help when I had questions, but as far as deciding, you know, going out for bids, deciding who I wanted, all of that were things that I did, if that was answering your question.
Yep. So I think what's going to happen for everybody watching this, by the time Beth is done talking about this move, you're going to want to ask questions far more related to what she's doing than what I talked about, which is perfectly fine. That's the reason Beth is here, because I understand probably you care more about the actual moving. I think the points that I made were probably pretty cut and dry, and there's not a lot of wiggle room on those. So just understand, when Beth is done talking, you guys can fire away with all the questions you have about moving an evidence room and maybe things she dealt with. If you've got them now, start feeding them into the question window, and I'll sit here and ask them to Beth while we're rolling along. But one of the things I think to note, Beth, and this is where I understand you're exposing yourself just a little bit. Talk to me about, what did you do for moving everything into that pod, and maybe what would you change now looking back?
Absolutely. And so what I did is I didn't necessarily track the changes as far as the move. It was pretty much in the pod. I kept everything in the same boxes or locations. And so I never created those transactions that it went into the pod and then it went back into the property room. I just kind of assumed that the location was the same, but really it wasn't. So that's something that I absolutely would recommend doing differently. Now looking back, the proper way would have been to scan everything out into like the pod and then scan it all back. And you can make the pod the parent location and then you're still individual locations within that. But at least so you are documenting that move, and that's not something that I did that now I see I should have. What else? I don't
That's
know.
your entire evidence room gutted and cleaned out?
Yes.
There you go.
And
Man,
so,
can you
and then
guys,
you'll see that that is like our safe and our refrigerator. So since there were people in there, I mean, to be able to get into the police agencies, as everybody knows, you have to be fingerprinted and things like that. So the workers that were in there were all fingerprinted, but to secure the things that I could not move out, which was the safe and the refrigerator, we taped and then initialed and dated and made sure that, it was fine.
yeah, so in your case, that's, I mean, and you did, I'm just curious, you yourself, Beth Bennett, did all the work to haul all the evidence out. Did you have anybody helping you move it into the box outside?
My boss that you could see in some of the pictures helped a little bit, but for the most part, no, that was something that I was in charge of. So,
Oh, so this is the other side I got. So this is one view of the evidence room. This is the other side. So actually, this stuff didn't leave. Is that? Oh, that's your property, right? Didn't you have property
um,
there?
so I was actually, like I'm sure other people, I was in charge of all the supplies as well. So that was a change that they made actually right before I came on. That they actually, maybe it was when I was there, the gate went up, and so that way it separated the supplies. So I was in charge of evidence supplies, uniforms, office supplies, all of that, and so we separated that from the evidence. So we did not have to move those things out because those were not evidence. That's just supplies.
Sure, sure. And you, yeah, I'm with you on that one. So yeah, so you gutted the entire room. They put in all the mobile shelving units. So I guess this is sort of
That
this
was
is the
me
way.
while they were being very loud. I would wear the headphones.
I understand that. Anything else you wanna say about all of this stuff? I mean, I think most people have mobile shelving unit now, so
Right. Yeah, no, I
nonetheless,
mean, I don't think so. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, I learned that even from, working for Tracker and dealing with Safe, our evidence software management, just the importance of those transactions. I mean, I feel like you're always learning things, and that's something that I would have done differently, looking back now. But other than that, I felt like it went pretty smooth. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, that's for sure.
yeah, so I do have a couple of questions rolling in now. So let me throw these out real quick. The first one is one of the people has said that when they moved their evidence room, they had a fire in the building. They did sort of like what you did. They moved, but let me add something to it. They moved everything out of the Connex boxes, which were outfitted with door locks, padlocks, and an interior gate, cameras, and alarms. They even completed a full inventory before the move and then after the move, and documented chain of custody as a part of every record. So that actually might be going a step further than what I'm even recommending. But just when I read that process right there, just the fact that he wrote that out leads me to believe that's pretty tight right there. I mean, there may be some things in there to look at, but not much.
I mean, and
Uh,
that's kind of the method that I would recommend as well. I tried to inventory absolutely everything right before we did it, and I know that there was a couple locations that I did not get done before we put it out in the pod. But like Ben had said earlier, I was doing inventories monthly, so I mean, it wasn't like we hadn't inventoried the property that I couldn't get done right before the move. In years, it would have just been within that year. It would have already been inventoried.
Yeah. So here's a really, really good question, Jonathan. Thanks for asking this question because people are going to want to know this. When you move all of this stuff into some secondary storage. The question becomes, do I check this stuff out and then into the pod or whatever it is, or do I just do a move on it? And the reason that question is so very important is because one is 2 transactions, the other is a single transaction. I think I'm going to broadly answer what I believe the answer is to this, and that is it really matters if the evidence is changing hands. Okay, so in your scenario, my guess is you yourself are taking the evidence, you're rolling it out to the unit, and you're putting it in there. In that case, I would think a single move transaction would be fine. However, if you had some really off the wall scenario, or I'll even suggest something that's not off the wall, I'm transferring evidence via one of my officers to the crime lab. Well, if there are multiple people involved in that process, you should have multiple checkpoints to make sure it's being done correctly. So in that scenario, you would check it out and then check it into the other. So I think the answer of what you're looking for, and Beth, you can tell me if you agree with that or not, is rooted in how many people are touching it. And if it's more than one, there should be a transaction for every person.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, if you have multiple people in the property room and, you know, multiple people are moving it out into like a pod and then moving it back, I would think that that would still be a move, because when you're creating those moves in the software, it's going to show which person did it. But if you're
Correct.
taking it to another location completely, and you know another agency is going to have possession for it for any amount of time, then I would absolutely say it would need to be checked out. But if you are moving it to a location within your agency, whether that be outside in a pod or an annex or something like that, I think that it would still be a move transaction, in my opinion.
And I agree. I think the important thing you said is that it's going to record who did that transaction. So I'm fine if 3 or 4 people are involved in the move, but that chain of custody should indicate this specific person at this specific time did the transaction. Because if I've got cameras recording, I want to be able to line that up with here's the date and time that this thing occurred. That's the other thing. This stuff should be taking place in real time. I mean, I certainly don't think you go in, you know, like at 9 o'clock the night before the move, you're going to go in the room and say, here, boom, I'm going to scan all of these items and move them all tonight so that tomorrow when the people are here, we can just do this quicker. I mean, just everything I said right there. I'm going to do it quicker. I want to, you know, that is where the problems come into play. And so this stuff should be done in real time. I mean, as things are being moved, that's how it should be done.
Yep, I
It's
would agree.
it is just too important not to have proper chain of custody on this stuff. Okay, Jonathan, thanks for that question. Let me see here. Somebody has their internet dropping. I think it's Jessica in Guam. So Jessica, I'll give you a pass on that. Guam is a long way away. So like every other time, this will all be recorded and we're going to post it out to our YouTube channel so you can pick it up at any time. Let me see. Yes, Jonathan said that did make sense. So we must have over answered his question, Beth.
Perfect.
Let me flip over. Why don't you, you know, so here is just this previous screen is what it looked like from dragging everything out, getting into the new building. Here's what the evidence room looked like after. And the first thing I noticed, I was talking to Beth about this. Let me flip over here. I won't throw this out to everybody, but here, watch this. Tell me what you notice right off the bat and see if you pick it up. Okay, so here's the old pictures, okay? And then here's the new ones. Right off the bat, what do you notice? Man, the light is so much like, you know, Beth was trying to sell me on the new room being so much better. And I'm like, well, good night. Looking at the pictures, like just seeing it in proper light makes it look like, you know, I think you could put the lighting in the old evidence room and it might have made those look way better than what they were. So the lighting is significantly better. I'm just curious, Beth, what outside of just having mobile shelving, what do you think were the biggest pickups in having all of this done?
Just the amount of space that you get from the mobile shelving and the organization. You know, you wouldn't think it from the first pictures, but I'm a bit of an organizational freak. And so that disorganization was killing me.
Yeah.
But with the mobile shelving, how organized you can make things be and the amount of space that you get,
Yeah.
I really loved it.
Yeah. I was going to say anybody that picks up an evidence room that really is an organizational freak, I think the best answer is just take everything out and bring it back in an orderly fashion. So I don't know that anybody would do that. I'm just like, when I look at this, that looks clean. I mean, it just really, really looks clean. And I would also throw out, Beth, I just want you to know, I don't think these pictures were professionally taken. And I see this with the faded background. So, I mean, the
No,
picture.
I must have had portrait mode on my cell phone because those were just all taken with my cell phone.
Okay, well, I mean, that looks, it all looks good. And I'm sure that, people that are stuck in old evidence rooms that might look more like what yours did. I mean, this is a for sure massive improvement. So, okay. Um, so, Beth, the question that is being asked now from Tom is, how long did it take you to do all of this? I mean, do you remember roughly how many pieces of evidence were in your evidence room?
I think typically we had like between 10 and 13,000 from what
Okay.
I remember. And I think we had the pod for 2 months, but I think we actually only used it for probably like 5 or 6 weeks. So it wasn't, a terrible long period of time, I guess. I'm sure it felt like that in the middle of it. And like I said, prior to the date where we had to have everything out, I was running around like crazy trying to do inventories again of absolutely everything just to cover my bases. So I mean, it was very time consuming, but I think all in all, it probably was 3 or 4 months. But the actual time being out of the property room was probably only like 5 or 6 weeks.
That's not too bad. So I'm curious if you care to share, did you find any problems? Did this process of moving everything out and moving it back in, did it shine a light on any problem, or was everything as copacetic as you expected it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, at that point, I mean, I'd been in the property room for years, and so I probably at that point had found many of the things that um, I needed to find. By that point, even though it does look pretty unorganized, I mean, I was doing inventories, so I was finding any issues well before that took place.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, again, I mean, I'm sure there are people on here when they look at your old evidence room and you use the word disorganized and a mess, they're probably laughing at you right now and probably thinking, oh, you think that's a mess? Let me show you a mess. And, because it certainly wasn't as nice as the mobile shelving units, but that I've seen messes. Again, you got nothing sitting on the floor. So you're not allowed to use the word mess if there's nothing sitting like just bags on the floor as much as you may want to. I'm sorry. All right. Well, let me see. I don't know. Let me see. So yeah, somebody's asking, and this is going back a ways, because how long have you been gone from Raytown now?
I left in October of 2018.
Okay, so it's been. I mean, you're coming up on 3 years now. Somebody's asking, did you have Narcan in your evidence room anywhere?
No, I never did, and I should have, but no. Again, I mean, I pretty much had to advocate for everything in that property room. I'm sure like a lot of people know that are in the property room, you're kind of down on the totem pole. So unless you're the squeaky wheel, things probably aren't really happening. So
Right.
no, I don't know that I completely understood the importance of it at the time to really ask for it.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't.
Okay. All righty. I'm actually out of questions. Does anybody else? Now's your chance to throw it out there. Yeah, the person that asked that question, that was James, by the way, James Nally. James, our Narcan guy, so he's the guy that's out there. And so he said, "Be a squeaky wheel and get it." And I do agree with that. There,
Yep,
yes,
I
squeaky
agree
wheel
too.
gets the oil for sure. Okay. All right. Well, unless there's any other questions to roll in, I'll give it another 30 seconds, and I'll thank you, Beth, as always. Let me see something is. Okay, somebody said somebody threw out in Florida for see, hey James, the problem with asking Narcan questions is you turn the conversation about into Narcan. So somebody is tossing out real quick that if you're in Florida and you need Narcan, you can go through the Florida Health Department Heroes Grant, and I guess they'll give you Narcan. So Russell, that'll be a great thing to post on the Facebook community group and just say, hey, if you're in Florida and you need Narcan, here's how you go about doing it. And people would love to have that on there. So, all right, well, I think we're good to go. Beth, as always, thank you so much for coming and giving your input on this. We'll certainly have you back again. And for everybody else that came, thank you so much for your time today. I hope it was worth the effort. And everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
See ya.